risk assessment. Why is that important? Getting our disclosure. Jonathan, did you want to take part of this slide? Sorry, I started jumping to.
Sure. I mean, this just gives an
Mm-hmm.
overview of the topics that we'll cover. That a little bit of a how-to and how to get started, how to build on what you're already doing. But I'll just comment before we go through some of these. I'm really interested in the connection between some of the themes that Constanza covered with the ones that Lisa covered. So Constanza had a lot of range of what the questions that clients ask us about ESG, the range of details for ESG. And so what I take from that is clients really, they do more of telling us what ESG is than we do of telling them what ESG is. And it's because they have a very specific definition. Everybody's a little bit different. You might be heavy on the E. You might have no physical assets. Maybe you're an insurance company, and so you're heavy on the S and the G. Maybe you are heavy on everything. But we find we have to do a lot of listening to make sure to get it right, to kind of hear what ESG is for the client and then see where they are on the journey, el desarrollo. That's one thing. And then I love connecting that to what Lisa said. This is a giant opportunity for the risk team. And not everybody is taking advantage of it. ESG really is about the risk to the business, and that is the risk team. That is ERM. And so if you can take some of these action items that we'll cover now to get involved and get involved even more with, we really like to see the partnership between risk and sustainability, especially. They seem to be co-owning this. And if they can partner, it really does work better. It really gets integrated. ESG gets integrated into the risk conversation, and sustainability benefits from the power of the risk team and what they do and bringing that into the ESG. So we have a few points that we picked up here that kind of go down that lane. So I know, Lisa, you're going to go through most of these 5 topics, and each one we'll give you a little bit of an overview on what we think a good recommended approach is. Some of you might be doing a few of these. I'll give you a description of some of the mechanics, and then we'll try to give you some case examples to bring it to life along the way. Does that help, Lisa?
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. Right, I lead our enterprise risk management practice for North America, and part of the reason I'm so involved in ESG is because these are the biggest risks facing organizations today. So when you start to look at, ask the question, what are your biggest risks? They are ESG risks. They are also climate risks, and so that's how we of course have dedicated teams that go deeper on these specific topics. But these are the enterprise risks of today. These are the strategic risks to organizations today. So we can talk a little bit about physical risk, just understanding the hazard. Changing slides. There we go. Okay, even just getting at the hazard can be helpful in looking at what is your risk today, and what is your risk? What could your risk be under different climate scenarios in 2030, in 2050, and on further into the future? And understanding how much of your this is specifically for assets, for your physical assets. How many of them are exposed to these things? And so this ties very closely to a property insurance review, but just on a longer timeline to understand what could go wrong and how much worse will it get, or in some cases better. There are the occasional beneficiaries of climate change for some risks in some places. You're seeing here heat stress, and you see that in Spain, heat stress is expected to, well, I guess you won't see how it changes, but it is fairly high in the midterm, even in the intermediate scenario, and it's possible that it could be much worse, and it probably already feels pretty bad today. So worse would be, of course, worse, and that changes a lot of things. It changes your operating costs. It changes all sorts of things. So important to understand. Oh, yeah, Jonathan, a question.
Yeah, let me get off mute really quick. I really like your climate diagnostic physical risk assessment work. I think it's super important for most companies who have multiple locations. It's it's important for them to understand for their supplier locations. Sometimes you want to have both. We even have clients who get creative and start looking at things like airport locations because they're important to their business, or hotel locations because it's where their clients might stay. So you can get very creative, but the physical risk problem is something that you want to quantify. So this is, we have this tool. What I also like is Lisa's team built this tool very similar to a CAT model, a catastrophe model. So the visuals, whether it's the geography map here or the summary of risks of the different perils that they put out from this, they're very easy to understand because a risk manager is so accustomed to seeing a catastrophe model summary. So this one's built in the same way. So it gives you all that information. And then the last thing I really like out of it is a lot of risk managers, if you think about your properties in the year 2030 or the year 2050, you probably know which ones are really in bad shape. I mean, they're in a wildfire zone, they're in a flood zone, they're in a major water zone, but you may not have that fully quantified exactly. And you may not know which year under which scenario things get really bad. And that's what this allows you to tabulate details in a way that you probably don't have. And then sometimes we do have clients that get surprises. So sometimes there is a surprise. You might think that you know all the places that are trending poorly, but you might have a surprise, and it's good to identify that as you move ahead. So that's a couple of notes on physical risk assessment.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. And I'll get to it shortly, but I wanted to touch on transition risk first. But I know that a lot of you are subject to the new EU taxonomy that you have to say what your mitigation and adaptation plans are. And that's the space where we are the strongest, is figuring out not just what is your risk, what are you going to do about it? And then how do you deal with it efficiently in a way that protects the value of your organization. So we'll talk about that, about trying to figure out how to make efficient decisions and sequencing them and looking at them as a portfolio versus one location at a time. So I'll touch on transition risk a little bit though. So again, back to the survey results. A lot of companies are involved in the transition risk conversation to a great extent. I think this is possibly sort of skewing to the risk managers who are already more involved. I think that the people who took the survey probably are already more involved than most. Just based on my own experience, I have a lot of conversations with risk managers who aren't a big part of this conversation at this time. But it's great to see that many are, and so we think they could be even more so. But so breaking it down into a few different categories here, your own impact, your own carbon impact, then also the risk from the changing economy, just the ways the world is changing, how will that affect you? I mean, there's always risk associated with change. There's upside and there's downside, but really trying to get a grasp of how does that affect your business model. And then, of course, the scope 2 and 3 kind of emissions here. What are your supply chain and partners doing? If you were there, it is more challenging, but it is something that increasingly is important to companies. So this is what we've heard from risk managers. And then what do we offer in this space? So we of course will help you look at. Go ahead, Jonathan. Did you want to say something? Oh, you're on mute still.
Thanks. Yeah, on this page, I'd make a couple of comments about what clients are telling us too. You have some clients who seem to be less worried immediately about their own physical risk assessment, and so they're doing that next year. And what they're spending all of their energy on is, where are my emissions today? Because I'm getting in trouble for that, and I don't have that quantified. So I like this, the carbon impact versus physical risk assessment is an interesting thing that's happening with many clients. The last line here, though, is the scary zone for all risk managers. Even if they start to have a little handle on what they're doing, everybody's wondering, how am I possibly going to have a better understanding of what my suppliers are doing, whether it's physical risk assessment or other pieces of ESG code of conduct, and how they have labor practices in all their countries. That's hard enough in all the countries where your companies might operate. So I find this to be a really interesting summary. It's not surprising that the numbers for supply chain are lower, because the confidence on how to do that is lower and has been done less by everybody. So just a couple of comments on this page.
Yeah, I guess I'd be curious from the crowd. Maybe if you could give a thumbs up or some reaction if you are engaging your supply chain and understanding their carbon impact today or planning to soon. Any reactions? All right. Oh, yeah. It's challenging. It's definitely more difficult to do, and so yeah, we'll see how that goes. But it's important to do too. Okay, so let's looking at what are we talking about when we talk about assessing your overall climate risk. We'll often do them together. It is two sort of different specialties, but we function as one team to bring it together and look at both your physical and transition risk. And then this is more of a qualitative assessment, but getting at just on a sort of a simple impact scale approach to how bad could it be. So this is sort of a step before you'd get into the deeper quantification of financial impact and before you would talk more about what you're going to do about it, your controls in place. But just understanding, when is it likely to occur? How likely is it to occur? And if it did, how bad would it be? So for this particular example, it is more the purple, violet are the transition risks, and the red are the physical risks. This is an example of this organization does have more transition risks than physical risks. And some of them are their biggest are also transition risks as well. If they don't have huge physical risk exposure, of course, this is probably like an example of a company that doesn't have a whole lot of physical locations, but it is so interesting to see how big could it be. I mean, they could be a catastrophic risk to them. I mean, this is a smaller organization, but an absolutely top tier, threatening the solvency of the company kind of risk, which is so interesting. And this is an industrial revolution that is happening now and starting now, and it will be a huge change to a lot of companies. So there is huge risk associated with it. Okay, but now I'm going to get to
Well, real quick, Lisa, but don't get off this page. This page is so interesting to me for the risk managers. So I have to say a couple of comments, because I watch your team do this with clients all the time. So first, if you're one of those risk managers who has ESG as a single risk on your risk register, please change that. That is not a risk. So one thing that Lisa's team does very effectively is it help the teams articulate the range of actual risks, rather than having something called ESG, because putting ESG on your risk register is not actionable. You can't do anything. But as you see the different examples here, what Lisa does here is she has a very clear framework to apply to something that sounds very unclear. Transition risk. I mean, what is that? But look at these, categories at the bottom left with the transition risk. Look at the opportunities. There's 3 examples in the middle, and then there's some detail on physical risk. So there's 15 separate categories, and each one with some input from a lot of people at the client, not us, but a lot of people at the client have been involved in understanding this likelihood on the top of the grid, and then when is it going to occur, which is across the time frame. So that is not just done by magic. It wasn't handed to WTW and created. Lisa typically engages 20-25 people at a client organization with the risk team, and that's how this occurs. And so at the end, not only is it clear that transition risk is finally clear, but because of the engagement of all of the different people that you connect with at your organization, it belongs to everyone. It's not a risk thing. It's not something that goes and gets filed. So this is one of the most exciting places that I see. I call it the magic. because it really does explain transition risk. And it really does engage all the people who matter at your company to create something that's actionable. And so you can show this to a board member, you can show this to a regulatory group, you can show this to an employee, and they'll understand that you have done your homework on what does transition risk mean to your company. So I love this. I think it's a super important, super exciting place because it brings something that's, I think it's very hard. I think it brings it to life. So there you go.
It is challenging, and it is difficult to it's challenging, but it doesn't need to be confusing. So I think it's really important to break it down, like Jonathan said, into its component parts and be able to say, and again, be able to say also that there are opportunities here. So it's not all bad news. There's some good news too. You
Yeah,
can find ways to.
and Lisa, I'll throw in, Lisa's got a team working with one of our clients now, and it was super interesting. So this transition risk piece at the bottom, we use that list of 8 consistently. We think it provides structure and consistency across how companies look at transition risk. So we have those engaged with this particular client. It's a large global industrial chemicals company. But on the opportunities, the client challenged us. It turns out the client has 2 or 3 businesses that are benefiting from what's happening. So they're some of their products are very positive in the sort of the green building space. So they have opportunities where we pressed much more aggressively rather than only talking about what was going to be a problem in the future. And so that was really a fun example. And that's what I would, encourage any client to make sure to spend enough time on that, because we all like to lean too heavily on the negatives, but there are opportunities, and you have, individual business segments that may be benefiting from some of these trends. And so that ends up showing up on the screen as well when we go through actual cases.
Yeah, it is great. And then it's further to that, sort of reminded me how important it is to think about who is your priority in this conversation for ESG. For instance, for green buildings, your executives are going to love it. Your investors are going to love it. It's going to make you probably more profitable in the long term. Your underwriters, however, may not love it. Underwriters can say, for insurance purposes, they can say they're looking to write better ESG risk, but underwriters don't like new things where there isn't much data. So then there is some tension there. There is some conflict on what makes you a better risk. So it is multidimensional, I'll say, but exciting. Okay, so this is what I was started to talk about before, and I'm showing this to you now because the previous slide showed both physical and transition risks together, and they are so interrelated that I think it's important to look at them together. You could do something like what I'm about to talk about. You could do it just for physical risk, or we very often do this for not even climate, just do it 1 year at a time, all of your business risks. So this is Connected Risk Intelligence, which is a consulting proposition that we have, and it's a technology interface as well. So what we look at here is this is where we get to talking about not just your risk, but what are you going to do about it, your mitigation and adaptation for climate risk, and then whatever you do for anything else. It can be insurance. It often is insurance as well, looking at what are all your different options. So this is looking at as many risks together as we've looked at. Because when you look at the risks together, you start to see benefits. So diversification benefits. If you have an investment portfolio, maybe not in the last few days, so we'll just put that aside. But in general, it's good to be diversified. So you get some upside potential, even though the market's crashing at the moment. It's not looking too good. But in general, you get that diversification benefit. So there are things that offset each other. The answer is a bit different when you look at it together. And then it's also a bit different when you look at everything you would do about it together. So each point on this cloud is all the same risk. It's all your risks together, and then a unique combination of different options for what to do about it. So it would be the combinations of different things, like maybe it's the, a big engineering investment at one site and then something different in another, and then it's some other ways of offsetting some of your transition risk, and then maybe there are some other things in here, pension de-risking and things like that all together. So then right, this is going to break it down a little bit better. So this is maybe what you're doing today. You could choose to save cost. You could choose to maybe keep your costs steady and reduce risk, or you could choose something else. But so the idea is to get down to that lower edge so that you're minimizing cost and risk together. So along that edge is the efficient frontier. And this is borrowed from economics. Normally, you may have seen it the other way around, where it's maximizing. You want to maximize returns. But when we talk about risk, we want to minimize things. So then looking at what are the best options for you, and how do you get there? So there will be individual changes you would make to get there that we can then talk to you about and how to sequence them. And there may be different things that would happen at different points in time, and where maybe you get more benefit from just making a few changes, and then the last couple maybe you don't want to get all the way there. But it's really helpful for creating a plan of action. What are you going to do about it? There's a Warren Buffett quote that says, "Predicting rain doesn't matter, building arcs matters." So figuring out how are you going to deal with this? That's what we're here to help with, is how to get our metaphorical arc built. Hope we don't need a real one. To get that built to protect your companies. Jonathan, you have your hand up. Thanks.
Yeah, you see that buen comportamiento, that good behavior with my hand raised. I want to bring this to life with some work that you did, and this is public domain, so we can talk about the state of Florida. You did this work for the state of Florida. I'll use some round numbers, but on this example, what the state of Florida identified is they could only spend a certain amount of money per year. So let's call it $200 million. So I mean, it's a bigger budget than a typical company, perhaps, but and they identified risks with Lisa's team. They identified things like mental health, bridge repair, changing sewage systems to ones that wouldn't be damaged by floods. They talked about building code improvements. So there's a list of risks across people, across physical assets, and so forth. And then she used this, Lisa, I think you used this methodology to say, where are they now? And they were not on the efficient frontier. And so they were able to use this method to say, okay, I can only spend the 200 million. And if I spent it a little differently, I can be in a better spot, but I won't be spending any more money. So tell them a little bit more, because I think that brings this to life.
Yeah. So it was the restriction was a little bit different because it's government. And because they've passed laws, they're not going to undo the things that they've done, but they do have an additional budget that is limited. So, okay, we're starting where we are today. We can't go this direction. Basically, we can't stop spending on what we're already spending on, because that's how you lose elections. But then they could spend more, or they could do some things that would go this direction. So it was an interesting challenge. But we were looking at all different kinds of things. Like Jonathan said, I focused on the water availability. So if they're going to run out of water, and then the water quality risks, which are very related. But looking at things like sewage treatment plants, and extending certain networks, and desalination plants, ways to get more water in the same framework as I'm showing here, as we pulled in climate risk, what would increase of course, Florida. So flood is of course a big risk, and then also cyber risk. What about cyber attacks and hackers and things like that? And look together at all the different things that you could do about it. And it's interesting that they are huge swings in the size of an investment. Some things cost a huge amount of money. A desalination plant could cost $1 billion, and then something like cyber protection could be as you could make a big difference with as little as $100,000. I mean, I know that sounds like a lot of money, but for a state, and for a whole big state, it's not that much money. So it's all these different things that you could do together, and then helping them figure out, you have a limited budget. What are you going to do with it? And figure out the best use of those funds. And that was interesting. And I think that corporations are like this to some degree too, but that the financial decision is not the only decision that matters.
Mm-hmm.
So navigating the politics of it as well was so interesting, but this made it easier, because then you could say, you're starting with this and you're saying, let's just talk dollars and cents. What's going to save us money? What's going to bring our risk down? And then, how important is it to keep this, you can sort of say like the opportunity cost. What is it going to cost us as a state to keep this person happy with the thing they want us to do? So it helps you look at that. It helps you look at all the different kinds of decisions you could make in an effort to bring down risk, really understand the value of each of them and the value of them all together, and the value of yourself too, to be able to demonstrate that how important the work that risk management is to the company and how much it protects everyone, investors, and the company itself, and profitability, and being able to pay people's bonuses and their paychecks, all of it. So it's such an interesting experience.
That's perfect. And it provides, it's based on numbers, which it keeps it from being based on people's opinions as to trade-offs. So yeah, so we got to run off to the next couple of topics, so we'll run out of time there, Lisa.
Yeah. So risk mapping, I'll just briefly touch on this. The short version of this is to say that ESG being many different risks, we want to put it in basically an enterprise risk management framework. If your enterprise risk management framework isn't contemplating ESG today, it's incomplete in a way. So bring it in and do the standard risk identification, which is aided by, this is just an ERM risk register. You'll see that it's some risks that perhaps would be on your register anyway, but just thinking about them in that context and looking at impact and likelihood, treated like anything else. But so risk identification aided by our forthcoming analytic model to help you make these data-driven decisions and fill in the white space. So I'll hand it over to Jonathan.
Yeah, I'll go over really quick. And Lisa, before you go too far, that last page with those examples, I mean, those details bring the risk to life also. You'll find if you do this bit of homework and don't just have the word ESG on your risk register, with a little bit of engagement, you'll turn a list like this and you'll have great E categories, great S categories, and great G categories that are very specific to the risk to your company. And anybody can put their arms around it. So anyway, I just wanted to, this really brings it to life, and it underpins the real work that's involved. But real quick on ESG analytics, we I think it was Constanza who mentioned at the beginning with numbers and tracking for ESG performance. That's a very important topic, and we find that clients are challenged with having good ESG scores, or they're tired of some other company providing an ESG score about them. So what we did, we released a prototype of this ESG tracker at REMS in the States last year in April. And we really believe that a client can develop its own high quality ESG score based on metrics that are really, really good. So what we've done here is we have a portal where you can have yourself scored E, S, and G against a competitor set. So in this case, this is an insurance company with quite a large employee base, over 25,000 revenue, over 9 billion US. And what we've done is we've brought in about 135 data factors under E, S, and G, and we bring them from a company called MSCI, which is a really good financial metrics that a lot of companies use for ESG. We bring them from Analyne, which has a way of bringing in data about your employees and what your employees think about working at your company. And then we have a data that we bring in from Polecat, which is really around the reputation risk data. So they scrape the worldwide internet and they know what's happening and people are talking about you, employees and others, both good and bad. So we pulled in those data. We think that those three data sets are quite good. So we do a lot of validating on those metrics. And then we bring in metrics from WTW. We think we have some pretty good data. So we have really good data in our climate hub, especially around transition risk. We have really good data in our risk practice that Lisa works in around every single brokerage line. So we bring in that data. And then we bring in really good data from our executive compensation team and some of the other people related groups, especially around whether or not companies are inserting ESG metrics into performance plans and other topics. So we bring all of that into one portal, and we use a scoring mechanism so that you can see your ESG score compared to your peer set, and you can change that. So this is just our approach, because we've been finding that clients are spending a lot of energy with Excel spreadsheets trying to build this. So we just have it in one spot that you can kind of build it and make sure that the data is pretty good. So I'll show another visual, one or two real quick on the next slide, Lisa. Now this just this shows how you can change your comparison group. We have one client that is building out 4 separate comparison groups because their 4 businesses are not the same. So they're not that interested in an ESG score for their company. They're interested in ESG scores for their divisions because they're too different. So the tool allows them to save a different version. So next. This just gives you a little bit of a view on how you would select the metrics. So nobody uses the 135 metrics that we have. That would be crazy. But some companies want to be heavier on environment or heavier on social. Maybe they're more interested in reputation topics, so they'll get more of our polecat data versus the WTW data. But this is just the screen where they go in and they look at the different metrics that we have available, and then they choose the ones that are relevant for them, and those end up being the calculator for their ESG score. Next, real quick.
No, not again.
You're freezing. Oh, no worries.
Are you ready? Sorry, I lost my connection froze for a second. You ready to move on?
Okay. No, we're out. Okay, perfect. This just shows this is an example of digging into the MSCI scores. Those are actual names of scoring elements, and the check boxes are the way that a client would pick and choose which ones that they want to use. If they're white on this screen, it just means there's no data, because sometimes there's not data for every topic and for every company. So this already shows which ones they can't pick because there's no data for them. But most of them for this example, they have data available. So next, real quick. And so then you get to have not only a score similar to what you saw on the front page, but you can trend it over time to see if you're heading in the right direction, if you're nicely positioned versus benchmark. So I'll talk a little bit about this page and what clients are doing with it. One, they're using it to communicate better, higher quality ESG scores, even if it's just to their own board of directors or their own management team. So it tells a good story and it's accurate with good data. Some of them are using it for inputs into their required reporting, whether it's to a governmental entity, your TCFD, CPD reports. It can provide inputs for that. But here's the exciting part. We are getting a lot of push from clients to use this quality data to support carrier decisions for underwriting. There's no direct impact on pricing, but can you have a good story on what we're doing with ESG to enhance my underwriting discussion, perhaps get some better terms for certain lines of coverage? That's the immediate risk manager output. So we have a few reports that are pre-baked in the system to provide a little bit more trend information for that purpose for brokerage related carrier discussions. So I just wanted to mention that one specifically. There's other specific items that are pre-baked for other audiences, but for this audience, that's an important one. So I'll finish with that one on ESG analytics.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. I think it's so important. That's something we try to do always in insurance discussions, but in general for our clients is your underwriters have some information about you and they're making some assumptions about you. You need to know more about yourself than they do. Right? So this is a great way to get ahead of it and understand, all right, what could they be saying about us? What could they be thinking about ESG about us? And sometimes we show this to clients and they say, this is not right. That's not correct. We're actually very good at this. And so it gives you a chance to anticipate those things and then be able to demonstrate why you are a better risk than perhaps just their algorithm thinks that you are. So we found it's really helpful in being able to change how the market perceives you. So we'll jump ahead. So going through all of the ESG analytics tool, part of it is risk identification. Part of it would contribute to your risk register and help you understand what are your biggest risks. And it's helpful to benchmark against your industry and understand, okay, that sort of can give me a sense of the size of it. How important is it because I'm doing much better, much worse than my peers? But so then after that, you would need to do some more assessment as well, but then understand, again, driving it, how you deal with it. And so some of these things aren't the kinds of things that you would fully do a probabilistic model of it, but maybe this is enough. So then understanding not only how likely is it to happen and how bad could it be, but then understanding what are you doing about it today, and are you doing enough? So if you're not doing very much and it's a big risk, then now you know this is what we've got to focus on. Yeah. And maybe it's not that big. Yeah. So anyway, just gives you a sense of how to deal with it.
Yeah.
But
And Lisa, we
we
have some pieces of that built into the ESG analytics tool to start the process.
Yeah.
But the way that you do it on a more extended basis is higher order.
Right. Yeah. So it's really a standard ERM approach, really.
Yeah.
Okay. Now I'll hand it back to Jonathan to take it home.
Yeah, last slide, really quick, just one item, a little bit out of our core zone for risk managers, but we find that clients often tell us that their board is saying one thing, their senior management team is saying another thing. The sustainability function just got established. It's a staff of 2. They don't know what their priorities are yet. Nobody's talked to me in risk. So we think it's very important to create alignment with the senior management team on what your ESG risks are. So this is our approach. We come in with clients and use an engagement process to connect with different groups. It's called Climate Vista. It was originally organized around just climate. I love the name, so I don't change the name, but we cover ESG topics with it too. But anyway, just to mention that if you find that your organization is in that category, and there are many, even if you're doing a lot of ESG things, there can be a way to create some alignment and some consistency of the message and the priorities across ESG. So that's all this is for. I think we're done with our slides there. So Constanza, tell us how we're going to close up and take a couple of questions or be ready for next step inquiries. Let us know.
Yo creo que si alguien tiene alguna pregunta por parte de los asistentes, es el momento. Tenemos 3 minutos y si no, cerramos la sesión.
Constanza, enviaremos la presentación, ¿no?
Sí. Sí, enviaremos la presentación.
Muy bien, podemos abrir cámaras si queréis. Pues parece que no hay ninguna pregunta. No veo manos levantadas. Pues nada, entonces agradecer tanto la puntualidad, la eficacia como lo bien que habéis trabajado la sesión de hoy. Muchísimas gracias. Veo por ahí una mano levantada de Javier González.
Sí, yo soy de Willis, de Towers Watson. yo os haría una pregunta a los asistentes un poco. Como veis, hemos tocado pues una propuesta de valor muy amplia, ¿no? Al final, como decía Fernando en la introducción, pues bueno, Constanza está conectando muchos equipos que al final trabajan debajo de un paraguas. Yo la pregunta que os haría es, desde vuestro punto de vista, ¿alguno de estos puntos que hemos identificado aquí es algo que vosotros ya empezáis a tener en el radar como pregunta? O sea, una pregunta de, oye, ¿cuáles son los puntos que hemos comentado aquí que vosotros sí que empezáis a ver? Y si estáis empezando a abordarlo, si en caso de que lo estéis haciendo, ¿vale? Si esto responde un poco a la realidad que os encontráis en los diferentes grupos de trabajo, empresas con las que trabajáis, etcétera, etcétera.
Muy bien.
No sé si...
Eva, que tienes ahí la cámara abierta.
Me ha tocado. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Okay, yes, well, of course, right now I'm in a different sector. Right now I'm in renewables energy, and of course I'm checking that a lot of these points are being reviewed by the company, because are very important for us. Our clients and providers are asking for these checks, and to be aligned with the necessity that the market is asking them. So I think that in two ways we are going to be obliged to go ahead or to go behind these ideas. First, the law that is being more and more restrictive, and second, the necessity of our own companies to fulfill requirements in the contracts or with the clients, because it's very necessary if you want to maintain or to keep or to get the client. So the point is, I don't know how long it will take us to adapt our companies to this point of view, but the future is here and it will be necessary to control it.
Gracias, Eva.
De nada.
Muy bien. Muchísimas gracias. Pues nos despedimos entonces con esta intervención. Fernando, ¿estás conforme? ¿Decimos adiós?
Sí, bueno, lo hemos grabado, lo vais a distribuir y bueno, la idea es que nos llaméis, ya también contactaremos con vosotros pues para aterrizar ya con el equipo español pues posibles colaboraciones.
Fenomenal, fantástico.
¿Puedo hacer una pregunta, Alicia? Ahora
Adelante,
en castellano.
sí,
Fernando, ¿estáis recibiendo muchos requerimientos para este tipo de acciones?
Sí, la verdad es que hay mucho movimiento. Lo que pasa que, bueno, yo creo que hay que aterrizarlo mucho porque hay mucha dispersión, como yo creo que ha quedado claro, de conceptos y, bueno, pues hay mucho consultor en el mercado, ¿no? Me apostaban durante y, bueno, Willis Tower Watson pues tiene esta forma de hacerlo, ¿no? Estamos también siempre en proceso de escucha, que nos oiréis mucho, que es un leitmotiv de Willis Tower Watson, porque creemos mucho en ello, pero lógicamente una vez que hemos escuchado ya tenemos que ejecutar, ¿no? Entonces, bueno, pues es juntar el mundo asegurador, como tú dices, que tiene sus problemas de transferencia, que además las aseguradoras sabéis que para suscribir están pidiendo pues muchísima información sobre qué estamos haciendo las empresas en la parte, digamos, de ESG. Luego también hay una conexión clara entre ESG y GRC, ¿no? También esas automatizaciones que nosotros también estamos trabajando y que son dos mundos que hay que unir. Entonces, bueno, yo creo que alguien lo dijo al principio, que fue Constanza, que hay mucho trabajo por hacer.
Real quick, and
sorry,
Eva,
sorry, Jonathan.
Yeah, no problem. Eva, I'll add on Fernando's answer that these conversations start very differently than a lot of conversations, because sometimes there's a very specific expertise that somebody wants, and so we have a meeting. But these, we have to go to the first meeting and we just listen, because the client really does need to say, we are very active in this space and we need some other help here, or we're just getting started, or we just had a reaction because our CEO saw our competitor get in the news for ESG in a good way. So where are we? Or I'm fully developed on my TCFD report, but I need somebody to help me with decarbonization. You know, or how do I bring in social and diversity into the ESG conversation? There's so much range that we can't come to a meeting and say, do this. We have to come to a meeting and say, what are you doing? And we can share with you where we are. And then that's when the actual connections happen. So it's a little bit different for us and in how we partner with clients than the typical solution.
Okay. Yeah, really. Finally, if we will be obliged to do that, well, first of all, because maybe the companies are completely convinced that it is the future, but in the other hand, because we will be obliged to do that. So it's necessary to know the way how. Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Eva.